One of the things I find so fascinating about the process of drawing is, you start off with one idea, and pretty soon, when you actually get going and you settle down into the studio and you start working on this thing, on this project, very soon it takes on a life of its own. Um, my initial idea was to draw myself as a virus, and without really any conception about what that might mean. And after a while, the process really just takes over for itself. And the intention here is not to explain what I've drawn, but just to recognize that the way you inquire in art is not too different from the way you inquire in science when you get going in your project. It takes you down routes that are unexpected, and if you allow it to happen in its most natural way, you get the most interesting results that you cannot anticipate or predict or plan out ahead. And I think it's a real thing they have in common. What is curious about this pandemic that we are currently involved with is that this virus, has made me think an awful lot about politics. Okay, now I never understood that very clearly. I guess until you experience it, that a biological agent can have a political motivation. I don't think the virus itself cares much about politics, but it is absolutely fascinating how a virus that is not, let's just say, a virus that is kind of a little bit, what is the word? There's a word I'm currently obsessed with. I'll come to it later. That word is insidious. I was going to say the virus is being insidious, but I don't think that we can't say that either, really. But the virus is not very clear cut. All right, let's just say that. If this, what I mean by that is, if this virus was a virus like the Ebola virus, and I use that virus as an example. It's a bit of a exaggerated example, but it makes the point really well. It's the subject of movies. It's the subject of our nightmares. A virus like Ebola, hemorrhagic, causes the cells to literally dissolve, internal bleeding. It's just the stuff of nightmares. So if we think about that virus, there's no politics that enters into it. If there's such an outbreak, everyone essentially adopts the same behavior, and manifests the same behavior. Okay, that seems to be like the point. Everyone is going to want to just do whatever they can to make this virus go away. Okay, it's unlikely that party politics is going to enter into it. But this virus, because it's kind of, yeah, maybe it is insidious, but it basically doesn't have a, on some levels it seems like the flu, what's the mortality rate? It seems to vary, between 0.2, some studies which look at the serology, i.e., how much, whether if they study the antibody prevalence of the virus in asymptomatic and just general random samples of the population, they can get a quite a high prevalence of antigen. Okay, and that lowers the mortality rate. That means there's a lot more people that have been infected by the virus that are then dying from the virus. It makes it look like maybe it's not so bad. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with the serology and what does it really mean to carry the antigen? Those questions are not known. And again, it takes us back to the fact that we are early, we don't really actually understand this stuff. Okay, we don't quite understand what that means yet. But it's possible that it's on the low end, the mortality rate. And 2% doesn't sound so bad, right? And I'm not saying it. I'm not saying that it isn't bad. It just, if depending on who you are, you can think, well, we can live with that. I'll take my chances. I'm fit and healthy. Why should I care? Yes, there are immunocompromised people who may be at risk. Yes, and they may be elderly at risk. Yes, but we need to take a chance to save our economy and to keep our society going. So that's the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that this virus has there's a political thing that comes in. And then being a scientist, I had to really try to think, what what is that actually? Like, what is what is politics? It's not something I can study in the lab. I can't do experiments to work out what politics is. It's a very much a social phenomenon. But, and I think this is very important. Um, Whether we are, and I guess politics is along two streams, right? So I think this is fair to say. There's two aspects. There's the more individualistically focused, and I guess you'd say that's more to the right of politics. And then there's the more socially inclined, which would kind of suggest more to the left. So there seems to be a clear divide, or a divide emerging in this outbreak between those that are wanting to kind of, more about individual freedoms. We see that very strongly expressed in America right now, where the thought of giving up your individual freedoms is abhorrent, cannot be tolerated. And in many societies, the thought of risking the lives of the vulnerable, cannot be tolerated. Now, both of those are very profound and very important sociological aspects, and they have a biological origin, right? I mean, you can think that, classic Darwinian thinking is, it's the differential survival of fittest offspring. That's the Darwin model of natural selection. Very much survival of the fittest style, individual strength in the group, and how it succeeds, how its genes filter through the population and become dominant. I mean, that's a tried and tested and a well-founded idea of what evolution is, and I think it's reasonable. So there is the strong sense that the individual is the cornerstone of evolution, and in that, somewhere wrapped up in that, is this idea of individual, somewhere to the right of, I would say, to the right, it's about the rights of the individual. Okay, the individual is the cornerstone of the whole thing. But at some point in our evolution, it cannot be denied, and it's very evident if we look around us, that we became a social animal. Okay, I don't know how long ago that was, but at some point, there's some really intriguing, these are well-studied phenomena theories. I remember reading a book when I was about 17 or 18, which I picked it up at a second-hand bookshop in Johannesburg, and it was called Roger Ardrey's book called The Hunting Hypothesis. And in that, it was a theory that was clearly, had a lot of traction, where, we learned to cooperate with other individuals to hunt, all right? Because let's face it, quite an ungainly creature. We've got these flimsy limbs and we run around on our hind legs. But we have a good brain and we can communicate. We've learned to communicate. And that gave us the social dimension, all right? That was really, so we became a social animal, and somewhere in that, so the ancestral trait is perhaps the individual, but then the social thing is an emergent property of us. And those two things are constantly in tension, the individual success versus the social contract, where we actually realize that we work together. That is, those things are, certainly the individual genetics is well entrenched, and there might be some entrenchment of the social genetics, our ability to cooperate. There must be genetic traits for that. And also a lot of just I think Edward Wilson refers to those as just memes, as, through our intergenerational transfer of knowledge, and we just know that we work better when we work together under most conditions. There was a great passage, a great line from this book I read about 10 years ago. So you might have heard of it, Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. Okay, it's a great book. Talking about, it's looking at biological evolution along the lines of our, I don't know, what was the book? I can't remember exactly what the book was about, but there was this profound sentence in the book where, he was talking about what it must have been like before we lived in big societies, all right? And it's still a bit like that in some parts of Papua New Guinea. He spent some time there studying the communities of Papua New Guinea. Think about this. At a certain point, and let's just stretch it back beyond Papua New Guinea to a few thousand years ago, we probably lived in very small communities, tribes, where everyone knew everyone. We were all related. So it's much less, much more about the individual, much less about the great grouping. But he said at some point, when two people who don't know each other encounter each other suddenly, there's a very strong biological urge that those two are now a threat to each other and they should want to eliminate each other or very, very quickly establish that they're related. Otherwise, they are enemy. Okay? And they're therefore either got to turn around and run away or try and kill each other really quickly. I mean, it sounds barbaric, but that's probably what it must have been like. Now, we have the same genetic makeup that composed that kind of thinking, but we live, if you look around us, we live in large cities and communities, and we have a social contract. We have learned to care and think about the needs of others and empathize. Probably the word empathy is a very emergent property that we can actually even care for somebody who's not our relative. The fact that we can actually do that is probably a very significant moment in our evolution as a society, as a social, highly social animal. So that's something I've really been thinking about because, I'm curious about this political dimension. And I find myself, like me, I've always been and I think I'll say this, and I think this is really important. Both the individual and the social are key integral fabrics of our society. There's a tension between the two, but both are necessary to move the system. I don't know if it's necessary is the right, but both are prevalent and both move the system forward. Okay, sometimes they come, but there's a tension, and that tension is just part of what it is. And and it must be accommodated because it just is the way we are built. It is the way we are built. Now, I'm pulled a bit to the social side of things. I've noticed that all my life. And care more about, and who knows, there's all sorts of things that might be sitting in some people's and maybe you have low self-esteem, so you care more about others than yourself. I don't know. It's all these things there's a psychological angle, there's a social angle, there's a biological angle. But the point is, that is the effect, that is the consequence of it all. All right. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm pulled to the left. So I read things in the media, and I think, well, so for example, let's go straight to this this article. This appeared on a friend's Facebook page, and it was in Real Clear Politics. I don't know anything about that publication, and I just didn't actually check, but it clearly looks like it. Well, I imagine it's a bit after having read a bit, it's clearly a bit to the right of things. And you can read in the title, How Fear, Groupthink Drove Unnecessary Global Lockdowns. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, is that true? Did fear, groupthink drive unnecessary global lockdowns? I found my brain now wanting to pick that apart to show that is not true, okay? Now think about that already. That's really interesting. Like, because I'm pulled to one side, the left, I wanted to find that incorrect. Am I pointing to the right thing? I don't know. Which is really interesting. And I think it's really important to always have that in your brain about what's going on whenever you're engaging with anything. Is you are one way. You are one way or the other, and you will be possibly resisting. We really have to be critical about the information that's coming at us. So I looked at this. I thought I will have a look because, I have spoken in the past about like real proper conspiracy theories. Now, this is not one of them. This is actually, I won't say worse, but this is where my favorite word comes into it. A real conspiracy is just generally wrong. All right, it's like 5G. 5G causes coronavirus. It's insanity. Okay, there's almost no other word for it. All right, and so it's actually quite nice and easy to refute. This, on the other hand, is, and here's my word, so excited, disingenuous. All right. Now, what do I mean by disingenuous? Disingenuous means let's read what it means, okay? It's not candid or sincere, all right? Typically by pretending that one knows less about something than one lets on, all right? Now, what it is it's not a lie, okay? Like in this case, it's not a lie at all. In fact, it's true, but the key is it's misleading, all right? So it's a very, and it takes us back to when I spoke a few days ago about what a fact is. So this is true, but this true statement is intended to mislead the author and pull them in a certain direction, okay? Which is really, that's what I mean by something is disingenuous. It's true, but it's trying to mislead us. Now let's quickly have a look at why I say that. All right, so that's the cover. I'm not sure. This graph might be, I'm sure it possibly is perfectly acceptable. It shows in the bigger picture, if you look at the entire population, and if you can see my pen, you can't really, but basically what it's saying is when you're young, COVID has almost, overall, what it is saying is that in the total population, if there's a COVID infection, it has very little effect on the overall death rate, okay? But, you know, again, that is looking at the total population of a country, of a society, which is huge. And yes, it's assumed that the virus is going to infect everyone. So it's slightly misleading to say it doesn't have a huge effect. The other thing that's slightly troubling is this is a log graph, okay? A log graph tends to flatten things off. Okay, so fivefold difference in something is going to come across as a very narrow band. So there's a fivefold difference in the mortality of elderly people. It's not going to look like much on a log graph, but it will look a little bit worse on a linear graph, on a regular graph. The point that the thing I really wanted to focus on, because this was where I felt the word pop out quite strongly, this idea of something being disingenuous. It talks about that famous study that was done about a month or so ago by Neil Ferguson, who's a very well-known and very influential bioepidemiologist in the UK. And it was at the time that the UK were really thinking about pushing this herd immunity idea, you know, which is it's in theory, it's certainly one way to go, but in practice, not enough is known about this virus to really suggest that it can even produce herd immunity. Or it's a great unknown. It's one of the great unknowns, unfortunately, in this whole COVID story. So he put out this thing saying, if we don't go into lockdown in the UK, at least, I'm talking about the UK now, there's going to be dire consequences. 500,000 people are going to die, I think it was, right? So that's one of the reasons why the UK went quite quickly into lockdown. Now, this publication basically goes on to say, I just want to move up a bit. Yeah, this is the part that really got to me, okay? This is the same Neil, this is what I'm quoting now. This is the same Neil Ferguson who in 2005, okay, 15 years ago, predicted 200 million could die from bird flu. That's a lot of people, am I right? This is the same Neil Ferguson who in 2009 predicted that 65 people could die in the UK from swine flu. The final number ended up around 392. Okay, only 392 people died from that bird flu. Okay, I mean, seriously, what this article is saying, how wrong, how mad, how overcautious, how completely insane is this Neil Ferguson? They do go on to say he had an affair and he didn't respect the lockdown, which is kind of like do we need to know that? Is that really, that's his private life? But the thing I want to focus on is, yes, very few people did die in those bird flu outbreaks. But this is where truth, fact, fiction, not fiction, but truth and fact become really interesting, is because that, the bird flu infects birds, all right? Millions of birds are infected by that flu. Now, that's a massive number of individual animals infected by flu. Those flu viruses can infect a human quite easily, but, and this is the key thing, they cannot go from a human to a human in this bird flu, all right? So there's no human-to-human transmission. And this is really important now. And this is, they don't go into that at all because it's insidious, right? There's a very high chance. It doesn't take a lot at all. And this is something I touched on a couple of weeks ago. It takes very little genetic change for a bird flu virus to undergo mutation. It's very likely that changes its changes its host range, all right? Which means bird flu infects the epithelia of a chicken, and it doesn't take much for it to be able to infect the epithelia and then transmit between humans. It doesn't take a lot of genetic change. That is how these viruses have evolved in the past. Very little is required. So if that happens, then it's quite likely that 200 million people can then get infected and cause a massive pandemic. Obviously, we're now talking about, these are predictive models. We don't know if that's going to happen, but there are likelihoods. And all we can go on, when you're trying to be a health expert, or when you are a health expert, you do have to make calculations. Sometimes you're going to not get it wrong. Let's just get it clear. He didn't get it wrong. His actions, by saying that, sadly led to the death of, well, these are, we can talk about the chicken industry, we can talk about the poultry industry, and whether and all these other industries and the livestock industries, which are great reservoirs for viruses. We can talk about the validity of that. That's a whole other and very important subject. But they basically had to wipe out every chicken in the country pretty much to reduce the likelihood, to drop the probability of that happening. Okay, that's all that they could do. So it's extremely disingenuous to accuse him of completely underestimating or overestimating the possible impact of the flu virus. They're using that to drive a political argument, to say we should not listen to certain epidemiologists that are predicting that we should go into lockdown because they've been so drastically wrong before. You only have to say that once or quote that in an article like this to know that this is very misleading and dangerous. And it's trying to exacerbate that divide between the more socially inclined, I'm not saying someone who's on the right is not socially inclined, but the tendencies move in certain directions. But they are trying to exacerbate that difference to drive their own agendas. And that is dangerous and cruel in times like this. And I find that really troubling and, yes, annoying. Anyway, so that's all I wanted to say. I'm going to, probably do another one next week. I actually want to share something with you quick while I have you here, while I have you locked into my my direct vision. Yeah, what I want to say is I'm going to be doing some interesting experiments here where I'm going to be inviting, because of my interest in art and science and bringing those things together, I'm going to start to invite, using this kind of forum of StreamYard, artists who have an interest in science, but also scientists, get them to talk, get us to talk together. And certainly while we're a bit isolated and can't do the things we want to do in their laboratories, we're going to do it this way. We're going to have coffee together. And that's the experiment. So I really would love it if you could join us for that. The other thing I want to mention is that I've just been told that an exhibition that I had, that it was cancelled because the virus has now been scheduled for the middle of June. So I'm hoping that some of you can come. And also I'm going to try and do some Facebook Lives from there. This could be an exciting new way to talk about art and science and social things and just to hang out, really. So that's what I wanted to say. I'm now going to see if I can stop recording. But essentially, yes, really good to hang out and take care of yourselves. If there are other things or questions, please pop them in the comments below. I can always come back to you later, which I'll share this video. Take care. All the best to you.